All right, I think we can get started. Thank you everyone again for joining today. Topic of our workshop today is Robotic Operations Center, and we're going to be talking about how do you transition support of processes and automation to a Robotic Operations Center. So we're going to be following the following agenda here. We're going to start with a quick round of introductions. My name is Karan Sehgal. I lead the ROC program for Accelerate. My teams are responsible for managing, maintaining, and optimizing automation environments for our clients. With me, I have Kyle Wilson, who's a senior manager within ROC. He's responsible for the L1 practice, and he also leads a number of client engagements within a ROC. So today we're going to be talking about, basically going to start with a good understanding of what a robotic operations center is and why do we need a ROC. And then we're going to move into various scenarios of automation transition, whether it's first time you've established the ROC or an ongoing transition. And then lastly, we're going to talk about what is an output of transition and how does it help building a robust robotic operations center for us. Right. So let's get started. And I think we can, we would actually reserve some time in the end for any questions and answers and any inputs. So if you have any questions and answers, would like to hear your views as well. So last 5 minutes, we can cover that. So let's start with our robotic operations center. Why do we need that? Typically, when we have enterprises starting their automation journey, they would start with a quick, a set of automations that they would want to build as proof of concept, a pilot. They would want to prove the technology, understand what kind of benefits they would need, they would have by building these automations, and what does it take to actually build an automation practice, right? So once you move out to the incubate phase, then you want to establish, they would have already established a solid process discovery methodology, a good way to generate new pipeline of automations, which they can add to the automation list and implement to get further benefits. So, when you move from incubate to build phase, you would see that as you start increasing the scale, as you start building new automations and moving them to production, you would see that the business benefits would start to go up. Right. When you get that, you would also notice that there is a high degree of dependency that is being built on these bots in production, because you have these automate processes which earlier humans were working on. They had these tasks, but now after the automations in production, they would have moved to different roles. They would have different tasks to do, and they may not be any backup in case of automation failures. So what you're doing here is increasing, a lot of business risk, operational risk, which obviously needs to be mitigated. So that's what a ROC is, right? Basically, a dedicated support ecosystem which you establish to ensure you have very minimal downtime, and you have processes in place and methodology to ensure that you can turn around and you can bring these bot to production up and running very quickly. Now, again, going back to the incubate phase, when the development team within a center of excellence starts working on new automations and they put them in production, what typically happens is the same team ends up supporting those automations as well, right? So they have dual responsibilities at this point. What will happen is when a new support issue comes up, they will have to stop all the development and they'll have to move on to support, because support at that point is more critical. You have to make sure the business operations continue. So that becomes the topmost priority for those development team. So again, if you run in that model, what will happen is you're stopping your new automation development, right? You're basically slowing down the scale. So what you want to do is you want to have the development team continue on the development of new automations and have a dedicated, robust, set of team which actually is responsible for making sure these automations work and they are maintained and supported well. The second reason that you would want to have a dedicated ROC is if you leave it to the developers, they're more expensive. You don't want them to be doing basic things like monitoring of jobs. So when you establish a ROC, you can intelligently, creatively build a team structure with layered skill sets at different cost attributes, right? So when you're establishing a ROC, you want to ensure that there is an optimal total cost of ownership for that. So these are the two main reasons that you would want to establish a ROC. And again, if you want to scale, you probably have to get into a model where you have ROC supporting the automations. Now that we have covered why we need a ROC, I think let's just quickly go over what a ROC is. A ROC is basically a set of services. It's very similar to the production support environments for applications. We have three levels of services: level one support, level two support, and platform support. Level one support is basically there as the first layer, which is the first respondents for any issues that originate in the production environment. They would be equipped with things like dashboards. They would have alerts, logs, emails coming to their inbox, and they have to monitor all of that to identify a issue has a production issue in the environment. So once they've identified, they would have a list of steps that they need to take, a troubleshooting guide, and they follow that and try to resolve that, resolve the issue and move the bot back into production. But if they're not able to do that, that's when our level two team comes in. They would be responsible for making sure they're able to, open the code, do deeper troubleshooting. If there is additional test data required, scenarios to be created, they would create those. They would also be responsible for minor enhancements to the bots. And again, the idea is minimize the downtime, put the bot back in production as soon as possible. Lastly, we would have our platform support team. This team would be responsible for the RPA platform, issues related to the tools, RPA tools. They would also coordinate with the infrastructure team at an enterprise level if the underlying infrastructure is resulting into any issues. So while these services are important and you need to have the right skill sets for different tasks, it is also important to establish a solid operating framework. And that framework basically includes a good way for governance and reporting. We need to ensure there are service level agreements, a good way to track, monitor, and optimize after review of those service level agreements on a periodic basis. There should be a good execution methodology. We need to have a good way to transition these automations to the ROC team. Right. So again, that's an important topic. We're going to cover that in the next few slides. We have some other things as well, like building dashboards, having the right tools for the team, and overall methodology and framework. So I think this is the first session and the workshop we have on Robotic Operations Center. There are a few more in the next 9 weeks. So look out for the schedule. There are things that we're covering on dashboards, and total cost of ownerships and things like that. So let's move on to the automation transition. There are two scenarios that we're going to cover here. The first scenario is when you just establish a robotic operations center. Now, this is the time when the development team or maybe an internal application support team is managing in a very ad hoc way. This is the first time you are onboarding a set of automations. So you might have 10 to 15 or 20 automations. Which are there in production. This is basically your bulk onboarding. And the next scenario is when we are doing an ongoing transition wherein, you already established your robotic operations center and the development team has been, back on the task to develop new automations. They put, 4 or 5 automations a month in production, and those get handed over to the ROC transition team. So let's talk about the first one. When we talk about the initial onboarding, when we have established our robotic operations center, I think the first and the foremost, the most important thing that you have to do is estimate what kind of resources you need to have a good level of service, right? So you cannot be under capacity on the resources. You cannot be over capacity. Under capacity would lead to a bad service for our customers. And overcapacity would lead to higher costs, eating into the benefits that you're getting from the automation. So it's important to have an optimal team capacity. And the way we do that is through an estimation process. We basically get all the automations, a list of all the automations, and then for every automation, we try to understand what the schedule for these automations are, right? When do these automations run? What time frame do they run? Then we also look at the bot priority and what are the SLAs, SLA requirements given to us by the business teams. When do these processes need to complete, right? If they error out, then when do they need to be, what time frame do we have to resolve that? So all of that is taken into account. We also look at different types of exceptions historically, whether it's business or technical exceptions. We typically go into a ticketing system if there is one. We look at the incidents which have been put in the past and try to understand what the resolution steps for those were and how much time did it take to actually resolve those issues, right? So once you have all of that information handy, you've evaluated that, we run through an estimation model. We come up with average handling time for different types of issues, which gives us the capacity for level 1, level 2, and platform support teams. Another important thing that you need to determine at this point is where do you need your robotic operations center and what kind of business coverage or the support coverage you need for automation. Some coverage may require 24/7, some may require 24/5, some may require 16/8, or some may just require business hours, right? So I think it is important to understand what kind of coverage and what capacity in those shifts or coverage time we need. And sometimes it may also lead to some decisions where to establish a robotic operations center. You can probably get time zone advantages if you set up something offshore in a different time zone. That way you don't have to have your support team come at night and work on those. So that is basically the planning phase. Once we have estimated, we get into the transition phase, wherein this is the time when we go back to the development team, the original development team, and work. The ROC team is closely working with the development team for knowledge transfer. We typically assign a primary support engineer to a process along with a backup, and that team works with the development team to get complete understanding of the automations. When we do that, we look at the prior ticketing system records, look at what resolution steps were followed. We gather all the documents, including PDD, STDs. If these documents are not available, we actually work with the development team to get that consolidated and create. If an output from our side would be to actually create an operational handbook. If that is not available, we also list down all the stakeholders for the process. You need to understand who are the business stakeholders, and again, when you're supporting, you need to make sure the business is fully aware of what is happening with the issues which are there in production now, right? So typically this time frame is 2 to 3 weeks. Again, could vary based on the number of bulk transitions you're doing for the processes. But after we completed that, we get into an assisted support phase. The support phase is where we are working with the ROC team is working on less critical tasks, less complex tasks, and the development team is still accountable for support at this point, right? So we're still learning at this point. It is on the job training for us, and then by the end of assisted support phase, I think the ROC team comes, they're fully equipped and they understand what needs to be done for each and every issue that comes up on the production environment. Now, then they move into the steady state support period after that. And typically the initial part of the steady state support is a baseline period where where the ROC team starts supporting it. And we also try to understand what SLAs or what is the what kind of metrics we have around the SLAs, right? So we work with the business to finalize those SLAs during this period. And after the baseline period, we start tracking and using that metrics to start optimizing the level of service. So this actually, these two parts are very critical: estimation and transition methodology when you're starting your robotic operations center and you're transitioning all the automations from the development team to the robotic operations center team. The next time we do onboarding transition is when we get into when the development team goes back and starts developing new automations and they do the hypercare. But I'm going to invite Kyle to talk about that process. Kyle, if you want to just jump in.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Karan. Let me get my screen shared here. Make sure it works. Perfect. So again, in these next two sections, I'll discuss how to transition new automations to the existing support team and what you should expect from the support team once the transition is complete. So once the ROC is established and new automation projects are being created, this is a way to transition your automations to our ROC support team.
Kyle, I'm sorry, Kyle. I don't think we can see your screen at this point.
You're not? So that. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah, I could see it.
Okay, let's make sure it goes through here. Are you able to see this screen?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So again, once the ROC is established and your new automation projects are being created, this is a way to transition your automations to our support team to keep the developers working on their new projects instead of maintaining the automations that they've already built. So we'll go through the automation project lifecycle in this slide here. So it first begins with your development period. This is all handled by the development team. During this stage, this is where the process code is being built. the solution design documents, process definition documents, and this is where our business contacts are established. Again, this is all done within the development team. The next phase is our user acceptance testing, which is also done by our development team. During this phase, the code and documents are being reviewed and altered. So in this phase, we're testing different use cases from the business. We're collecting our observations of the exceptions that we're getting from these test cases. We're also looking at different troubleshooting techniques that we can add to our handbooks. And at this point, we're trying to figure out how our escalation logic is going to work. So who will be informed from the business, how will they be informed, and in what sort of fashion that occurs. So this next phase, the hypercare period, the project is actually in production. So the development team then pairs with the ROC support team, or Operations Center support team, to start learning and transitioning this automation to support. So during this phase, we'll be sharing the code and the workflow from development team to support team. We'll figure out the process frequency, the schedule of the process. We'll assign a priority for that process or automation, because not every single automation will have the same importance or priority to your business. At this point, we're also establishing a primary and secondary support contact for the support team so that everyone knows what automations they are responsible for. Also, the operational handbook, again, is being reviewed. At this point, we should have a solid escalation logic on how we handle issues. And also, we're adding new exceptions as we see them occur in the production cycle. At this point, still the business is being communicated with by the development team until the final handoff occurs, which we call that period the post-hypercare period. Again, the process is running in production at this point. However, the support of it is now with the ROC support team. So that allows your development team to continue working on new projects while we support this automation. Now, what you can expect at this point is the process has been transitioned. We are now monitoring, maintaining, and escalating this whenever we see issues. There's a constant review and updates to our operational handbook for any new information that comes in. A process may be changed or enhanced at this point. And the business communication is transitioned to the support team. So the support team will be handling all of the communication going forward. So that sums up the ongoing transition process for support. So now we'll discuss what to expect from the ROC support team. So the output of our transition. At this point, the ROC support team is established, the automations have been transitioned to the team, and they're running in production. So our service level agreements for each automation, they're now known, and this is what drives our support team in the ability to manage the automations and manage the incidents and enhancements for the automations. So service level agreements, what they allow us to understand is the priority of the process and sensitivity of the information, the required response and resolution times. For example, if a process needs to be completed by 2 p.m., that must be outlined in our service level agreements, and we have to plan for that within our automation management. Another would be the frequency of the process and the schedule. Does it run during the week? Does it run on the weekends? Do we need support at night, etc.? And then also, what is in and out of scope? So what's a business versus a technical exception case? All that is outlined within our service level agreements. So the first piece to ensuring our service level agreements are met is the automation management. And we can break automation management down into 3 different categories. The first one being automation monitoring. So proactive monitoring is done by our support team, mostly our level 1 support members, to ensure the automations are running according to their SLAs. We do this by implementing a couple different tools. The first tool is dashboards. So these dashboards can be built by our support team or an internal IT department. What we use these for is to catch unusual automation activity that can trigger faster and more proactive responses from our team. There's a couple different types of dashboards that we use to display relevant information, but we'll discuss this in a further detail in our later workshop. The second is the actual emails that come from the bots themselves. So we'll program these bots to send emails to users and the support team when an automation has failed or it needs to be investigated. This is also one of our other triggers that the support team uses to take action and a way to inform the users that there may be an issue with the automation. The third layer to this is using the process or automation logs. So this displays step-by-step what's being done within the automation and allows for our team to pinpoint where exactly the issue is coming from. So the second piece to automation management is actual enhancement of your automation. So what we mean by enhancement, this is a proactive change that needs to be made to keep automations functioning according to their service level agreements. Our support team will be able to recommend enhancements as we collect automation data, and the business users will also be able to request enhancements to their automations based on the needs of their experiences. So some examples might be with enhancements, you might expect more volume in the future. So year one, you've had your automation up and running, but you expect year two, your volumes to double. We'll want to know that information so that we can adjust our bots accordingly and enhance them for you. Another example might be an application that the automation is using might be upgraded. So the home screen might have changed, the whole interface of the application might have changed, and that can disrupt your automation. So if we have that information ahead of time, we're able to program that into our bots and make the enhancement to ensure a smooth transition to that application upgrade. A third might be a step in the process has now changed due to regulatory requirements. We know regulations are constantly being changed, and we want to make sure that your automations are compliant with that as well. And another example or final example might be if our support team sees a lot of exceptions occurring around the same time or within a pattern, we'll make an effort to try to reduce those exceptions, figure out why they're occurring, and then make enhancements proactively to the bots. The third piece to the automation management is the actual reporting of the automations. So there's different types of reports that are produced to measure various aspects of the automations and support team productivity. The first would be your automation productivity report. So this is simply your transaction volumes, your processing time, your run frequency, your cost savings, really just diving into the specifics of each and every automation. Another would be the automation incident history. So this allows us to prioritize automations that encounter the most incidents or failures. The incident history will also be used as a guide for us to fix the incident in the future. So all fixes that are made are logged within our incident history and moved to the operational handbooks so we can continue our knowledge. The third is incident or enhancement metrics. So reports can be created to track the productivity of our team. What we mean there is the amount of incidents that are handled by our team, the response time to when an incident observed is then started to be worked on, the average incident handling time from end to end, the incident volumes, and this will help us allocate our support team members as needed, and it'll also help evaluate the workload and effectiveness of our support team. So that's the automation management side of ensuring our service level agreements. The next piece is the incident and enhancement management. How we typically manage this is within a program such as ServiceNow, allows you to create reports and create tickets and incidents for your automations. That's just one example. There's other tools available for that as well. But again, what we define as an incident is an occurrence in which the automation's not performing as expected from the service level agreement. And enhancements, again, are proactive changes that need to be made to keep the automations functioning according to their service level agreements. So there's 3 layers to this. Number 1 is creation. So our support team will create incidents proactively as they see them occur. So this would come from our dashboards, our bot emails, our process logs. If we're able to catch this very quickly before any business interruptions, we can create incidents or enhancements and get them underway within our support team. The next is response. So the response is the time it takes from when the business opens an incident or an enhancement to when the support team actually starts working on it. So this is defined within our service level agreements for each automation, and the response time is critical to getting the automation back to being productive. The third is the completion of our incident tickets or enhancements. This gives us a record of all the completed enhancements and incidents for us to reflect on. We take all this information and we add them to our operational handbooks to make sure we have the up-to-date troubleshooting steps, list of known exceptions, and exception logic. All the information we collect from our automations and incident and enhancement management will be added to these handbooks. And really, this is a way to ensure that our knowledge is continued and easily transferred. And that right there is about the end of our presentation for transition methodology. So we can now move into question and answers.
Will you guys be sending this to us, this deck?
Sure, we can send it. Yes, and I think the recordings would also be available for this, so we can send that as well.
Oh, great, thank you.
Is there some sort of RPA like maturity model that would call out when's a good time to set up a ROC?
Yeah, I think typically, as I mentioned, we have the incubation phase, right? That's when you're starting to establish and proving the concept of RPA within an organization. Then you start expanding that concept across different business units, and then once you have matured that process of gathering the requirements from the business, building a pipeline for automation, having a solid discovery approach, you would, at that point, you would actually have a way to define what processes needs to be supported in what way as well, right? So typically when you move into the build phase and you move out of the process, the POC mode, you would want to establish the methodology. At least the steps should be taken to set up the initial ROC.
You wouldn't happen to have that like in a slide or something that I could show executive.
I don't have a slide for that right now, but we can add to it once we send this out.
Sure. Thank you.
How about using offshore resources? Are there any complications with that?
Actually, offshore works out better when you are supporting odd hours. I think what is very important here is the communication piece. If you have a solid communication framework, things work out well. If you don't have a good communication framework, you would see issues where teams are not responding well, they don't understand the issues. So again, when we move into the transition phase, it is important that we have good framework for that and we establish that communication model with the team. I do have one question for you, Kyle. I think we talked about the process monitoring piece. I think it'll be good to talk about how do the teams monitor, right? So as part of transition, we also need to think about dashboards, because if you don't have dashboards, you can't always dig into the logs to identify what issues are appearing. So how do you build these dashboards, and what kind of dashboards do you build?
Sure. So typically our team builds two different types of dashboards, one for monitoring and one for reporting. We can use various tools such as Kibana, Elasticsearch, Splunk, Google Charts, and we display this information depending on what you're looking for. So for monitoring, we would build up dashboards that show us all of the automations that are currently running and how long they've been running for. You might be surprised to see that a process has been running 2 or 3 times longer than it typically should be. So we would have a dashboard that would display that. Another example might be an errors or an exceptions dashboard in real time. So it's kind of like our RPA heartbeat monitor, where we can look and see how many processes are actually throwing technical exceptions, how many are throwing errors. And the last one would be a per process dashboard for log monitoring. So if you have a really high priority process and you want to zero in on just that process, that performance, we can build the dashboard just for the logs for that process. That would include when transactions are successful, how long those transactions were taking, if there's been any errors or alerts, and we can do that per process. The second part of it is reporting. So the reporting dashboards are more about transactions being completed over time, how our virtual machines are being utilized, how our robots are being utilized, the different success versus failure rates, and cost savings. But we do split them up into 2 categories, which is, again, monitoring and reporting dashboards.
Do you use any automated testing tools for RPA?
So I don't know, Ahmed, do you have any inputs on that from
the
COE perspective?
I think the automated testing tools per se are not particularly used for the automations. What we have done in some mature environments is add a testing capability to your automations, where every automation actually comes with a smoke test, which is wrapped in a framework so that your build component, as you're building your build and deploy automation, can call that smoke test as it deploys. There are quite a few dependencies when you deploy RPA automations in terms of applications, data, access, credentials. So to do automated testing of the automations themselves that are actually accessing underlying applications is a little tricky. What we have done is we have built a framework for one of our customers that is similar to a unit test framework that you'd have in an app dev world, where the tests are within a framework, and the build automation actually calls that test to verify the deployment.
Okay, thank you, Amit. I think we are almost done with the time here. We would be happy to get any further questions. Please feel free to email it to us. We'll be sharing the deck. And as I mentioned, we have a series of workshops on robotic operation centers. We have one on dashboards. We'll go a little deeper into it. But I would just like to thank everyone for joining today.